What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Water Cooler Talk. My name is Caleb Turner, and I'm a sports writer at KSL.com. It is November 24th, and we are once again coming at you with a recap of what's been going on in the world of sports over the last week and the last few days over this weekend. So, to start out, as we have been the last few weeks, some riveting college football going on in the state of Utah and around the country. If you saw the article that Josh Furlong put out on KSL.com today about the latest AP Top 25, the rankings for college football, he talked about it there, the chaos with 8 teams, the top 25 losing this week. Tons of shifting around, a lot of people jumping, a lot of people falling, and unfortunately, one of those falling, or fortunately, if you're a Utah fan, was BYU. The Cougars losing two in a row. They lost at Arizona yesterday, 28 to 23, to move to 9-2 on the season. After that perfect start, losing two in a row, not a great way to kind of finish off the season. They've got one more game though, and we'll get to that later on in our look ahead. Moving on to Utah State, they were the only team to win, basically. They beat San Diego State up in Logan, 41 to 20. Bryson Barnes, former University of Utah quarterback, up there, helping them to that big win. And then the Utes, lastly, they were playing at home. Rice Eccles Stadium lost to Iowa State, 31 to 28. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but as I mentioned last week, with this loss, Utah no longer will not be eligible for a bowl this season. Will not get to 6 wins. Lost 7 in a row and didn't weren't able to beat a Big 12 opponent at home this season. So forgettable, certainly on that day and the season in general for that Utes team. Moving on to a little basketball, the Utah Jazz went 0-4 on their most recent road trip, but they returned home to the Delta Center and got a home win over the New York Knicks yesterday. And speaking of wins among Delta Center residents, the Utah Hockey Club uh, started the week with a 6-2 home loss, so not a win, a loss to the Washington Capitals. Have since gone 1-2 on their 4-game road trip so far, but they won yesterday, and that's what matters most, right? And yesterday, Saturday, November 23rd, was the first day this year that both the Jazz and Utah Hockey Club have gotten a win on the same day. One on the road for hockey, one at home for the Jazz. Nonetheless, those two Big Four teams here in Utah getting wins on the same day hasn't happened at all, not often at all this season so far. So good to see that happen just yesterday in our recap. And now we move ahead to our look forward to this upcoming week, Thanksgiving week. An exciting week for sports. It seems to get a bigger and bigger deal every year. Of course, you got NFL games on Thanksgiving Day, you got football, but it's also become a big week for basketball. NBA kind of putting some games on. Um, College basketball as well. I mentioned that over these next couple weeks, the in-state teams would be finally matching up with some bigger teams, some more level talent, and that will be happening this week as well. In an exciting Thanksgiving week for sports, if you're a sports fan here in Utah. So to start things out, we've got the Utah Jazz, 4 in a row at home starting this week, and against some pretty fun opponents, some Western Conference rivals in the San Antonio Spurs, Denver Nuggets, Dallas Mavericks, and Los Angeles Lakers. All of those, top 10 teams or so, I would say, in the Western Conference. A couple of those have made finals the last few years. So big opportunity for the Utah Jazz this week. And if you're a fan of the NBA here in Utah, a great week for you to be able to come out and see some of the biggest stars. Victor Wembanyama on the Spurs, Nikola Jokic on the Nuggets, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving on the Mavericks, and of course, LeBron James, Anthony Davis on the Los Angeles Lakers. So tons of star powers, tons of entertainment value. If you happen to be here in Salt Lake and can get into the Delta Center of these next few games, certainly maybe the tickets will be hiked up a little bit more than they have been so far this season for the Jazz. I know people have been talking about record low prices getting into Jazz games for, single digit dollars, which is usually unheard of. So can't promise those same prices against teams like the Lakers. But who knows? We know that LeBron doesn't like to play here in Salt Lake, so maybe he won't play and maybe he'll get a discount on tickets. We shall see. But moving on to the other Delta Center resident, the Utah Hockey Club, they've got one more on the road on this four-game road trip before they come home on Friday against the Edmonton Oilers. Black Friday, that is, day after Thanksgiving. So once you get done with your shopping, head on over to Delta Center and take in some NHL hockey. Take in some maybe some fights. You see some fights in the stores, and then you see some fights on the ice too. So it should be an entertaining Black Friday. And moving on, lastly, to the college football slate this upcoming weekend as we head into the final weekend of the regular season for college football. Utah State has their finale at Colorado State on Friday. Black Friday coming up pretty big, like I mentioned, for sports. Utah, the Utes also playing on Black Friday at UCF, Central Florida, in their regular season finale. Both of those teams, Utah State and Utah, looking to move to get their fifth win of the season, move to 5-7 on the season. Neither of them will be able to get to a bowl game, unfortunately, which maybe for Utah State you could have guessed before the season started, but if anyone predicted before the 2024 season began that Utah and Utah State would have the same record after 12 games, you'd be a rich man right now if you put if you put money down on that bet. I'll just say that. And lastly, for college football, BYU, they'll be back at home in Provo at LaVell Edwards Stadium, taking on Houston, a battle of the Cougars, BYU Cougars versus Houston Cougars, in that Big 12 finale on Saturday. So day after Black Friday down there in Provo, as the Cougars look to get to 10 wins on the season. Hopefully finish on a high note, 10-2, see what they can do when it comes down to college football playoff rankings and selection. 12 teams this year get into the playoffs. So certainly a bigger field, a larger opportunity for BYU to make it in. Obviously, the best path would be go to the Big 12 championship, which is still in play, but became a lot less likely with that second loss, that loss at Arizona State for BYU. But who knows? You know, crazier things have happened. So certainly that 10th win would help BYU out a lot. And lastly, speaking of BYU, I've talked about them, the basketball team, a little bit here previously. Yegor Demin, potential top 5 NBA draft pick. Well, we're finally going to be able to see him and the BYU men's basketball team up against some better competition this week as the undefeated 5-0 BYU men's basketball team takes on 5-0 Ole Miss Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, as part of an invitational down in San Diego. This is kind of the week when these non-conference college basketball little tournaments kind of start to happen. Maui Invitational, a lot of people know about that one. They pop up around the country, and both BYU and Utah State this week as well participated in that. The 5-0 Utah State Aggies men's basketball team facing yet another undefeated basketball team in 6-0 St. Bonaventure Thursday. Fun fact, both those games, Utah State and BYU, tipping off at the exact same time, 3:30 p.m., Thanksgiving Day. Now, if you're an early type of Thanksgiving family, maybe you've already eaten at that point, and you get your meal, you sit down, watch a little basketball, and if it's boring, you take a little nap. If not, you know, fun entertainment for the rest of the afternoon. If you're like my family, unfortunately, we will not be having our Thanksgiving dinner until 5 p.m., which I think is a little bit late. But more time to build up that hunger, and I'll have a little time to watch basketball before I have to sit down for that meal that we all love so much with our family members. Now we move on to our winners and losers of the weekend. Winners, singular this week actually. Utah State, the Aggies, the only team, only FBS top level college football team in the state. You look at Utah, you got Utah State, Utah, and BYU. Well, the Aggies were the only ones to win their game the last 2 weeks. Who would have thought? As I mentioned before, you know, they could end up with the same record as the University of Utah. BYU has lost 2 in a row. Well, not the Aggies. Even if they start out the season pretty poorly, you know, five losses in a row was looking a little dark there for a bit. Well, they started to turn things around a little bit. And the Aggies have risen to the challenge, as it were. And we've got to proclaim them winners this week because they're the only ones that seem to know how to do it still in college football. So shout out to them. Dropping 41 points in college football is not easy. So good for them. Obviously, not a lot of defense being played in those games, but they're getting it done. So shout out this week to the Utah State Aggies and the pig farmer quarterback Bryson Barnes. Our loser of the weekend, or actually losers, I guess, in this situation, Utah fans. No home conference wins in football. So if you're a Utah fan and you happen to go to Rice Eccles Stadium this year, hoping to see a great Big 12 win for your Utah Utes, well, it didn't happen this year. Weren't able to do it, whether it was through injuries or just some poor play by young players. Um, these Big 12 teams came in here and took care of business against Utah. Obviously, the one that sticks out for a lot of fans is going to be that BYU game, as I mentioned on this very podcast. BYU won it by the skin of their teeth. Controversially, I will add, with several calls at the end to help them, and they go on to lose the next two games. So it's not a great look, but nonetheless, those fans that attend those games did not get a win at Rice Eccles Stadium this year in Big 12 play, and you don't get a bowl game. So less games to be able to watch your Utah football team. And maybe that's a good thing if, with how their season's gone, maybe you don't want to see a 13th game from them. Call it good with this regular season, 12 games, rebuild, recruit, bring in the next team for next year, and see where you can go. But I think in general, for where expectations were and for what you want to see on the field, wasn't quite there. So, Utah fans, I'm sorry, you get loser of the week this week. And that's going to do it for this week's show. I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving week. Eat all the good food you can, watch all the good sports you can. There's going to be a lot of it, and we'll see you next week.